Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Patrick Murtaugh, and today I will be talking about the structure and the discipline of the Roman army. The research question that I used to start my project was, what set Rome apart from other ancient civilizations in terms of military approach and overall dominance in combat? It became clear to me upon doing my research that the major contributing factor to the greatness of the Roman Empire would have to be the strength of their army. Um, their army was the greatest the world has ever seen, and it wasn't by accident. It was a result of the strategy and the unique organization that they applied. It was all done with purpose, and that purpose was to be able to control the largest land area in Europe and essentially become a center of cultural influence for all of the Mediterranean. Rome was unlike any other civilization of their time in terms of discipline, strategy, and organization of the military. They were very unique in the fact that they chose to separate their infantry into smaller, more specified segments. They had many advantages at their side because of this. They were able to attack in waves and weaken their opponent, overwhelm their opponent. They were also able to move faster through territories and gain more control over land. These specific units that they split up into were called the Velites, the Hastati, the Princeps, the Triarii, and of course later on the famous legionaries. The Velites were considered the entry class to the military, like today's enlisted class, and consequently they were the first used in battle. This infantry was the poorest of the soldiers. They were given a small, cheap shield, cheap leather armor. They had 5 throwing javelins called pilum that they would have to buy themselves. And basically, when enemies would approach, they would be on the front lines of their army, and they would quickly throw their pilum throwing spears to render enemy shields useless and basically weaken the opponent for the next wave of attacking infantry. That next wave was the Hastati. Hastati were used as a second wave in the infantry, like I previously said, and they consisted of the wealthier individuals and the Velites. You can see that they're wealthier just by looking at the picture I've supplied here. They could afford better weaponry. They used a bronze helmet, a large rectangular shield, the famous gladius sword that was used by mostly all the units in Rome's army except for the Velites. They also had 2 throwing spears, which were the pilum as well. Their strategy was similar to the Velites in that they would also throw their pilum at advancing enemies to break shields and kill soldiers. But they would get closer in combat than the Velites did, and they would eventually retreat back so the next wave of infantry could come through. That next unit was the Princeps. They were mainly middle-aged men. They had more experience, higher quality weapons because they could afford it. They had better quality weapons than the Hastati and the Velites, obviously, because they were in a wealthier class. The Princeps would charge into the enemy as they were trying to recuperate from being attacked with the pilum from the Velites and the Hastati, and more often than not, would quickly force them to retreat before even having to match up against the next unit that the Romans supplied. The Triarii spent most of the time at the back of the army and went into battle only if they had to, which was rare. If the Princeps required assistance, they would fall back and allow the Triarii to advance. Since they were the wealthiest class, the Triarii were equipped with the most expensive and most useful equipment. They had chain mail, bronze helmet, scutum, which is the large shield, and short thrusting spear. At around 107 BC, Gaius Marius was elected consul, and he began the Marius reforms for the legions, in which he constructed reforms that would allow anybody to enter the military regardless of class. Also, conquered territories would have to supply fit men to fight according to these reforms posed by Marius. These reforms were a way for Rome to keep their army supplied and also have working class men working in the civilization of Rome as well, because they couldn't always be out fighting battles with no working men, no working class. The legionaries were more proficient in battle and were trained better and more thoroughly. Even though they didn't have to be a higher class, they were still considered um, the most advanced and the best hand-to-hand combat fighters. Each legionary was given the same weapons and armor as every other legionary, so that no one was better than another. Generally, this legionary would use its pilum, similarly to the velites and the hastati. When commanded, they would also be able to convert into a formation called a testudo, which is displayed here on the right. This is a formation in which there would be a roof and walls to prevent attacking from almost anything, arrows, spears. They would disengage from this formation and attack, and then they would re-engage in the formation and so on. They were a very effective unit that wouldn't have existed without the reforms of Gaius Marius. After completing my research, I was attracted to the method of pentattic criticism, as I found that the unique organization structure and strategy of the Romans would be something that I could use as an artifact in pentattic criticism to eventually gain more perspective to why they did this and how it worked. As you can see here, the act and artifact is the unique organizational structure of the Roman army. The scene is 1st century BC, which was the period of largest expansion for Rome. Agent was obviously the Romans. And the agency which they operated under was warfare as a necessary tool for expansion. The purpose and the motivation for this artifact and for this act was that their goal was to become invincible in combat by overwhelming their opponent and goading them into strategic error. After completing the pentattic criticism, I realized that I had a better understanding of why they were so unique in their structure and discipline, and I also began to realize that this unique application of organization structure was necessary in order for them to be as dominant as they were and become the great world power that they were. Using these different units and strategies and having a sound sense of discipline effectively helped the Romans to rise and become the world's most powerful empire of their time. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to questions.